joining us once again on the program. It's been quite a while. Lisa Graves is the executive director of the Center for Media and Democracy, a national watchdog group that does great work. And they are very concentrated on investigating and exposing the undue influence of corporations on public policy, which is gigantic. As you know, their latest expose talked about how a top Republican, I'll tell you what, I'll let her tell you what their latest expose is about instead of me. Lisa Graves, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Richard, and it's a joy to be here. We actually have a number of exposés that we've unfurled recently, so I'm not sure which one to focus on, but we do have new materials that we helped break that were provided to us that reveal that the chambers of commerce in the states actually did a survey of their members in states across the country, and those are business executives, CEOs, and others from businesses in state after state. And that survey found that there was overwhelming support for increasing the minimum wage and providing paid sick leave and providing extended family and medical leave and paternity leave and other key progressive ideas and positions. And that presentation was made by Frank Luntz's group. He's the big Republican pollster. And basically in that presentation that we unmasked, the lead lobbyists for businesses in the states were told, hey, your members really support these policies. That means that they have empathy. That was the term that was used. And here's how to combat it. And then the Luntz Group proceeded to tell them how to pivot from talking about increasing the minimum wage to focusing on increasing the earned income tax credit to try to pivot away from this very popular policy. And what didn't happen in that presentation, or subsequently, for the most part, was for these state chambers to say, hey, if our business members support these policies and the public strongly supports these policies, we ought to get on board and support these common sense policies. So that's our latest big expose. We've got more.
No, I know you got more, and that was the one I was interested in. So I'm interested in all of them, but that was the one I was thinking about talking about for a variety of reasons, including my experience with the state and national chambers of commerce goes back to when I was running a business in New Jersey, which I'm trying to think, about 20 years ago now, and these guys would come to me as the head of the company and try to Chamber of Commerce guys and try to sell me, and both the national and the state chambers of commerce. And I remember the state guy came in and I said, I don't like your I don't like your policies. You're too right wing for me. And he went, no. That's the National Chamber of Commerce that you don't like. We're the State Chamber of Commerce, and we're here looking out for businesses like yours and people who live and work and care about New Jersey and all that. And I think one of the things your expose, this particular expose, showed me was that they're actually not trying to do that at all. They were trying to persuade, I didn't join, by the way, but they were trying to persuade, they've been trying to persuade business owners like I was to act against, to actually change their beliefs rather than represent them in the Capitol. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. And in fact, what we know happens, and we certainly have seen this with other business trade groups or front groups like the National Federation of So-Called Independent Businesses, NFIB. They're a membership organization, so they have a number of businesses that pay a small amount in dues, per year to be a member and maybe get some hotel discounts or what have you. But they're not really calling the shots. The shots are being called by the DC, connected lobbyists, by the lobbyist infrastructure, and by some of the biggest corporations in the world, some of the big global corporations. And so the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, as we noted in one of our pieces related to this expose, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been led for a couple decades by a guy who decided to really focus the U.S. Chamber on the biggest businesses on the planet. And as a consequence, more than half of the U.S. Chamber's revenue, which is in the millions per year, come from just a few over 60 businesses in the United States. And so, they are playing a disproportionate and instrumental role in dictating policies that are hostile to workers' rights, hostile to minimum wage, hostile to increasing minimum wage, and hostile to what most businesses, according to this survey, actually do support and what most Americans strongly support.
You know, it's so interesting. Lisa Graves, executive director of the Center for Media and Democracy. I've been saying this for years, and I did as a researcher a private project some years ago on the Chamber of Commerce, and tried to compile as much information as I could on the fact that the guy you're talking about, Tom Donahue, at the national level, actually gets a lot of revenue by basically renting out the Chamber of Commerce name to specific industries that want to push for unpleasant policies or unpopular policies or both, without having their own names attached to it, because it would be too bad for business. So they kind of private label the advocacy on behalf of some, there are all sorts of things that they do. So yes, they do favor 60 or so corporations. But one of the takeaways that I've long suspected, and your expose gave a glimpse into the machinery of this, one of the takeaways that I've long felt is that not only do some of their positions violate the opinions of small business leaders, and that was fascinating to me in your study, but it violates, I'm trying to think of I've said this before, but I'm trying to think of the best way to put it, that when people talk about, for example, representing business, if you're representing giant corporations, that's not the same thing as representing the kind of medium-sized and small businesses that provide jobs and growth.
I think that's right. And one of the things we've seen, for example, are these big franchisers, which a lot of the people know them more by the names of their brands, the big fast food companies, McDonald's, et cetera, along with some of the other really huge global corporations like Walmart. Those corporations, their interests really are in, paying workers as little as humanly possible, as little as the law will allow. And they've demonstrated that over and over again, although, they do have some PR campaigns about internal promotion programs, et cetera. What you have is a situation in which these franchisees in the states are part of a franchise agreement with these franchisors that is predicated in some ways on paying extremely low wages, right, and then the franchisor, the big corporation, basically taking rent or substantial fees out of every dollar sold, in part because obviously it's that brand, it's the brand of that company. But what you see in these states then is this idea that all small businesses are sort of the same and that they're all job creators and that whatever they want people have to defer to. In fact, you have a number of small businesses that do pay their workers well, that pay their workers living wages, that pay them more than the minimum wage. And I think what you have in some ways is some of the, sort of franchise operations that are really squeezing people so hard, people who are working extremely long hours and still not able to be above the poverty level. Or in the case of Walmart, which isn't a franchise, but obviously has a number of stores across the country, you have workers who, are working full time and have to rely on public assistance because they just cannot afford the basic necessities for their family, and to survive in the increasing costs to live in this country. And so, for me, as someone who waited tables while going through college, I was sort of shocked to discover when I started working on this issue a couple of years ago as we were investigating it, that the wages, the minimum wage for tip staff hadn't gone up in more than 20 years. Still a little over $2 an hour for your hotel maids and for waitresses and waiters, and then in many states the federal minimum wage is the minimum wage. Many states haven't gone much above that. And you think about that $7, $8 an hour, depending on which state you're in. People can't afford rent. Everything has gone up more than that in the past 5, 10, 20 years. But these wages have really stagnated, and these businesses, these handful of real cheapskates, have been distorting policy to their own advantage, even though most Americans, and as this survey points out, most business leaders actually support increasing minimum wage because they know people can't survive on those wages.
Well, they know. We're talking with Lisa Graves, executive director of the Center for Media and Democracy, about new information that's come out on the Chamber of Commerce and some activities there. They know those small businesses not only support an increased minimum wage out of, reasons of common decency, but also in many cases they feel, I believe, that their businesses would do better if people could spend money on the necessities of life and maybe a luxury or two. That's when you talk about franchises, yes, everyone knows McDonald's, but there's also, for example, Yum Foods,
Right.
which owns a lot of Taco Bell, I believe, and some other restaurant chains. So, and when you talk about Walmart or a large corporation like Yum Foods or McDonald's, what you're really talking about is when someone works full time and has to go on some form of public aid, you're really talking about the taxpayer subsidizing some of the wealthiest corporations in the world that won't raise wages, or some of the big hotel chains or whomever that won't raise wages, but at the same time are paying out dividends to shareholders, huge salaries and bonuses to senior executives and so on. So they're literally exploiting both their workers and the public as a whole through tax subsidies or welfare subsidies in order to enrich themselves, right?
That's exactly right, Richard. And I think, as Robert Reich demonstrated in his fantastic film from last year, and so many other really respect-worthy economists have demonstrated, the fact is that when ordinary people, which is most Americans, have more money in their pockets, they spend it. And that is what has strengthened our economy over decades. That's what built our economy over decades, is working people, ordinary Americans having wages and wages to spend, versus this ridiculous, absurd, and utterly debunked idea of trickle-down economics, which is this claim that if you give the wealthiest elite more money in their pockets, they'll spend it, and somehow some money will trickle down to you. It doesn't work that way. They offshore their money. They bank it. They are not spending it in the way that ordinary people have to spend that money to buy milk, to buy gas, buy clothes. And we know, and the economists know, that's a simplification of it, but we know that when ordinary people make more, they spend more, and that has really been the engine of real growth and healthy growth in our economy, not these ridiculous Reagan-style, Koch-style trickle-down economic schemes.
Right, and in 1968, when the minimum wage in real dollar terms was almost $3 higher than it is now, I'm doing the math, $2.50 maybe. The fact is, at that point, we had an unemployment rate of 3.2% as opposed to what it is now. So whenever you hear people say that paying people more would cause them to lose jobs, that's not what the evidence suggests. I mean, I suppose if you paid everybody a $75 minimum wage, maybe so, but no, we're talking about 15 or as a baseline, or some people say 12, but who are advocating raising it. But Lisa Graves, one of the things that strikes me, we have corporatization of media now as well as everything else. This to me is a big deal, this expose, because this says that an organization that supposedly is representing all of business and that's taking money from business owners, as my little anecdote illustrated in one way, instead of representing them, is trying to persuade them. So in other words, if I'm a business owner paying my state chamber of commerce, I'm actually paying money to have you change my mind rather than represent my opinions. To me, that's a big deal, but I feel as if maybe this hasn't gotten the media coverage in this corporatized world that it should have gotten. Hopefully I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, we did get a number of pieces talking about, including Forbes this past week, but I don't know how much it was covered in the States, quite frankly. And a lot of people read, they read their local papers. A lot of people, unfortunately, are listening to the propaganda machine that is Fox News, and it certainly wasn't covered there. And so it's certainly the case that this information could and should be more widely spread, because that's exactly right. These businesses that are paying dues to these state chambers, some of them don't even realize how much they're being betrayed. And in part, what I suspect has happened is that, and just to be clear, what the survey showed, this is a survey of 1,000 business leaders, and the survey took a long time to be completed. It was very detailed. These business leaders, in overwhelming numbers, over 70 to 80% of them supported these policies, supported increasing the minimum wage, having the law change to do so, supported laws requiring paid sick leave, and more. I think that those chambers are not going to be disseminating that study to their members, saying, "Hey, we've been betraying you all along. We haven't been advocating for you. This is what we've discovered by the Franklin survey that many of you participated in." A lot of these business people probably aren't talking with other business people about this because they may believe the same rhetoric that we've all been led to believe by these chambers, that they're an outlier,
right?
That they're not in the majority, that their views are in favor of these policies are minority views or discredited views, and so they're not talking about it. And instead, what you have is this media platform being used, this commercial media platform being used in the states to say, to quote the chambers saying businesses oppose this, to quote the one or two businesses, oftentimes franchisees, that the local chambers put forward to show there's business opposition. They believe it, the media believes it, the politicians believe it, and it's just not true. An actual extremely comprehensive recent survey of business leaders from across the country showed that that's not true. But I suspect that many of those members still don't know that they've been lied to, and that they're being misrepresented by these chamber lobbyists.
And it's a great point. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Lisa Graves, Executive Director of the Center for Media and Democracy, I guess we should let them know they're not alone. And we should also thank Luntz and the Chambers of Commerce for doing our polling research for us on progressive ideas. So, Lisa Graves, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's all available at prwatch.org.